Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex, and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, mental health and kink, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. Come with us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance, and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I identify as a cisgender woman, and my pronouns are she and her. In this episode, I'm speaking to KATY JON WENT, a public speaker and educator on gender identity, sexuality, mental health, human rights, diversity, and inclusion. KATY's pronouns are they, them, or she, her. They are transgender and identify as non-binary and asexual. Find out what that means to KATY in this episode. We also talk about adolescence and development, religion, conversion therapy, cross-dressing, being outed, depression, aesthetics, sex workshops, hormone therapy, being a reluctant transsexual, gender reassignment surgery, going on a journey towards authenticity and freedom of expression. It was recorded on the 19th of October 2020. Now let's get into the episode. So, hello and welcome. What's your name?
KATY JON WENT.
And how do you identify, KATY? What other labels do you like to use?
Oh, I'm glad you added the labels bit in, because just asking me how I identify is a deep existential question that I think from time to time I've conquered. And then on every second day of the week or every third month, I realise, oh, no, I'm still thinking about it. So I guess the easiest label for me to say that I can be 100% affirmative about is I identify as human and I lurophile. Everyone can go and Google that one. Means cat lover. Those are the two things that are very definitely true of me. As to the rest, it's a movable feast, sticky labels and all the rest. So I like labels, but I also recognise that they inhibit and slap them on a delivery box and get shipped off somewhere. So yes, I'm non-binary currently, but I have been other things. I'm asexual, and I've also said at times in my past that when people say, how do you identify? I say, well, I am or have been every letter of L, G, B, T, I, Q, A, and P. And some of those letters even have double meanings. So I guess at a relationship level, and I guess I have to put my hand in the air and here and say that I know you intimately. I'm polyflirtatious, but the asexuality means I don't want to do anything with it. I'm kind of or grey romantic. I've kind of grown out of romance, if that makes any sense. And I've been in open relationships for about a decade, but again, the asexuality means I'm not really doing anything with it. So I've got a very outside of the box attitude to relating. And I guess I'll probably find more labels in the future to come. But those roughly describe me now, but I can't guarantee whether they'll be true in a year's time.
So it's very much a journey.
Yeah, I think that's the best description of my whole life. I mean, I've used often the analogy of a train journey. Even in knowing you, I've described it as, sometimes our tracks will converge. Sometimes they will. I'll go into a tunnel and you'll go over the mountain, or we might go to different countries, and we certainly might arrive at them separately because I'm such a pain to travel with because of my anxieties. I think a journey is a very good analogy, and I like the train journey idea or the cruise idea in the sense that there are different ports and stations I'm getting off at, and I spend time at them and I explore them and see how they fit, and I go, well, that was interesting. I spent some time there. I spent some time sexual. I spent some time trans. I spent some time straight. I spent some time Christian. I spent some time doing various things, thinking and trying to see if I enjoyed visiting that country. But very often, it's not that I get bored of them, but I find I've exhausted the possibility of them actually working for me, and then I move on. So journeys and stations and countries and ports are a very good geographical analogy to my world. And my world has consisted of, more than two genders and more than two sexualities. So there's several continents to explore, and I still think there's probably more to explore, but I don't know what they are yet because I thought I'd done them all.
So, how was that for you when you were young? Did you have any ideas about Like, how did your identity and you maybe questioning your identity, what did that look like?
Well, I guess I have to out the fact that I'm 53. So I think going back, the earliest I can really remember is being 3, and I can really, it's only, I could probably count on both hands and possibly even only one hand the number of instances I can even remember under the age of 10. So it's scattered memory. It's not complete. And within that, I can remember being 3 or 4 and just feeling like a child. I identified as kid. I identified as child, and no one told me that there was a gender box to go with it, really. I
Mm.
mean, I guess I knew I was boy, and that I came second in my family's hierarchy after the family cat. My parents went and got cats thinking that having children was not going to happen, and then I came along as an accident or a miracle or a curse or a blessing or some such thing. But I remember playing with the kids in my street and playing with them because they were the kids. And I played with them because, I mean, here's another label I haven't used. I probably would say I'm sapiosexual or sapiosensual or something like that, because I'm not interested in being sexual with the brain. But brains are the things, or interesting personalities are the things that interest me most about another person. I'm
Mhm.
attracted to an interesting person. I can aesthetically appreciate a beautiful person in different forms of beauty. And I don't mean just the world's idea or the glossy magazine's idea of it. But even as a kid, I was attracted to the interested people. And it wasn't about gender. But at the time, most of the other boys were boring and most of the girls were interesting. And it wasn't that I was attracted to a feminine body or a male body, or I wanted to play with the interesting people. And that meant that if the girl wanted to play football or wanted to climb a tree, I would climb a tree and play football with the girls. I didn't think that was a gendered right or wrong thing to do. I remember making rose petal perfume with a girl a few doors up and playing football with the girl next door, and then getting dirty in the mud with a boy, and vaguely have some memories of playing football with a boy a couple of doors down. But generally speaking, really didn't like sport. But I love tree climbing and playing war games, and also some girly pursuits as well. I didn't really put them into a girly boy box stuff.
Mm.
And I think the first time I encountered the division between there are two boxes, boy and girl, and you're going to kind of have to choose, or rather, there was no choice. You are in one, whether you like it or not, which I think was what I felt.
Mm.
Was at primary school. And again, I think the first year or so, we were kind of treated as kids, like we're all doing this together, we're all doing that together, and everything was all together. Partly, I guess, because at that age, there's no real physical development issues. That means that boys eventually become stronger and therefore would outpace most of the girls in sport if they were playing in the same year groups. But until puberty, boys and girls can perform at sport quite equally. And again, there was no kind of sexual threat or anything like that. So I think maybe 5 or 6, my recollection is that things were quite still uniform at school. But there came a point where I've got this strong memory of a teacher one day saying, okay, boys sit here and girls sit here. I don't know which year it was in. Probably I was age 5, 6 or 7. And I just suddenly thought, oh, seriously? I have to choose? And I don't think I felt that there was a choice. I just thought, well, I guess I have to sit with the boys because I'm fairly certain. I know that I look like them. I know that I am one. I didn't think at that young age, hey, I'm a girl trapped in a boy's body, or vice versa. I've never really felt that, actually,
Mm.
which is a stereotype of people who are trans and go through this journey. That's not something that was overtly real for me, but
Mm.
I did think internally, I don't fit into the boys' camp. And I thought, well, it felt from an early age, though, the girls were my tribe more than anything
Mhm.
else. And I remember in the end, I actually sat at girls' tables in class more often than boys from an early age, all the way through up to about age 10, actually, I think. And one of the reasons I did was because, one, I enjoyed their company better. Two, they were better at communication and emotional sharing, which boys had zero interest in. If you emotionally shared to another boy, you got beaten up, or they just didn't understand what you just said. They weren't
Yeah.
interested. They wanted to talk. They wanted to play top trumps, British Bulldog, and discuss sport, or and none of those things was I interested in. But the
Mm.
girls wanted to talk about how they were feeling, and that's something I always was open to from the earliest
Mm.
age. I can always remember talking about feelings. But I did used to sit at the girls' table and allow lots of them to copy my spelling answers. So I think the girls embraced me because I was good at spelling more than anything else. I thought it's because I was good at emotional sharing, but I think it was down to my spelling. But those years were, I guess, additionally difficult. I had a sister who was 2.5 years younger than me. I saw her as a sister and she saw me as a brother. I think those categories at the time were clear. But around age 5, plus or minus a year, I can't be exact, I also had an operation on my genitals. And up until that point, I think my sister, who was a couple of years younger, as I say, maybe 3 at the time, was saying, I want a winky too. And then after I had this operation and had to have my winky bathed in the bath every night and things like that, she said he thought, okay, don't want one anymore. I remember the things that stick in your mind from when you're young are strange. My sister had dolls. They were called Gregor and something else. They were these Swedish dolls. She had a boy girl and a girl doll. And I had Action Man. And what I can distinctly remember is that all of those dolls, when you pulled their pants down, none of them had any working parts. So if you want to know what, I guess, corrupted me or most inspired my non-binary identity, I guess it's the fact that all the dolls I played with were non-binary. Even though they weren't made that way, they were just accidentally that way because no one wanted to give any dolls working parts.
Yeah.
So that remains a facet of my young exploration and things like that. And I was one of those kids who never played doctors and nurses with some other kid down the street, which I always thought was a weird thing. It's meant to be one of those kind of body part discovery things. So I never discovered what was meant to be in a girl's or a boy's pants anyway. The only thing I had to go on was mine, and I didn't particularly like it, didn't hate it. It was there. So, yeah, I think my childhood in that sense was confusing. And I thought deeply, but didn't have the vocabulary or the language or the psychology or the role models external to myself to think, what am I? Who am I? All I know is I didn't fit and I didn't feel like there was anywhere to fit.
So there's the gender journey versus the sexuality journey. So was that in any way confusing? Because I have talked to, say, in episode 11, I believe it was, when I talked to Charlie. Charlie's gay trans man, but obviously gay is the sexual orientation versus the whole gender identity thing. So there's two separate things going on. And I think maybe especially years ago, it was not that clear that there was maybe a difference between the two, or people might not have known that there was a difference between the two. And that might have been adding extra confusion to someone's journey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and having listened to Alan's podcast with you, talking about Havelock Ellis, going back into the late 19th century, and also going back into ancient cultures, if you differed from heterosexuality or cisgender in any way, shape, or form, you differed in sexual biology from male and female, i.e., some version of intersex or what used to be called hermaphrodite, then you were lumped into this third other category that in some cultures is simply called third gender, that Havelock Ellis and others described as an invert. And very many of the people they were looking at as inverts in the late 19th century and the early 20th century were either distinctly or indistinctly some combination of being gay, intersex, or trans. And for many of the early cases that were studied around this, these people, it wasn't a case that you were one or the other, but you could be a blend of all three. And that basically sex, gender, and sexuality were things that you might have an othered identity as within all of them. And I think I don't see it distinctly separate as perhaps Charlie did, because when you ask me gender, sex, and sexuality, I see all three of them as interlocking circles, like a Venn diagram, not as discrete circles or boxes. So if you ask me my gender, I think it relates to my sexuality. If you ask me my sexuality, I think it relates to my sex. We experience gender embodied. And I've always found that confusing because it didn't really embody properly in me. So I chose, because I wanted a good education and I was given the offer by my working class dad who, saved up and also sacrificed massively because he believed massively in education to go to a public school, an all-male public school, which I thought for educational purposes would be great. No distractions with girls and all the rest. And I do remember my last memory probably of primary school being us all playing kiss chase in the school playground and one of the teachers coming out and stopping us and banning it. And I do remember a distinct memory of you would line up at either end of a netball court at school sort of thing, and the boys would line up at one end and the girls would line up at the other end, and we'd all run towards the middle and try and grab someone and kiss them. Of course, that would be really wrong in #MeToo era. It would also be really, really straight in this much more LGBT inclusive era, the assumption being that all 10-year-old children only have a heterosexuality. You know, what happens if you were the boy that wanted to chase a boy or the girl that wanted to chase a girl? And I guess my memory from that was that I felt like I did to a little bit feel like the girl inside the boy that wanted to chase a girl. Although that's reducing it to this binary aspect, I also overthink things so massively that I thought, well, if I feel like a girl and want to chase the girls, so I think I'm attracted to girls, but I think I feel more like the girls. But I didn't want to be unfair or to cheat. So I thought, well, I still better go and stand with the boys because it would be unfair if I stood with the girls and was much closer to them and was able to grab one immediately. But I end up in a all boys school, which would have progressed normally, except for the fact that I didn't progress normally. And from the age of 11, I was under a paediatrician, actually for orthodontics and dental work, because my jaw was out of alignment and I had to wear a brace and things. But they kept saying, well, your jaw isn't moving. And they did some tests and said, well, yeah, you don't seem to be growing in the way that you're meant to. You don't seem to be progressing according to the standard charts for a child of your age. And, you know, at around 11, 12, 13, they were recording me as basically being at least 2 years below the normal age and height ratios that were meant to exist. And they kept saying I had a bone age that was 2 and a bit years less than my real age. I didn't know what that meant really at the time. But I guess I should have, if I'd had better understanding and we'd had the internet back then, I might have Googled it. But the dilemma was that when the other boys aged 13, 14, 15 hit puberty, I didn't, because I had this bone age that was 2 years or more lower. And in fact, it got worse. The gap grew bigger between me and my peer group. I was not only the shortest kid in my year, I was the shortest kid in the year below my year. And when I was playing rugby in the rugby showers with the boys afterwards, they were these towering giants, developing muscles, beginning to shave, voices beginning to break. And I was this terrified creature on the other side of the shower, basically, that meant scared for my safety because everyone was bigger, stronger, more confident, and becoming more manly. And nothing was happening. Zero was happening in the becoming manly stakes for me. And I wasn't gay in that sense either, because I had zero attraction to these half-naked males in the shower. That didn't stop my first relationship being with a boy. But I think I was looking for love and affection and touch, and I wasn't looking necessarily for homosexuality. I was just looking for the aesthetics of being loved, cared for, touched, caressed. And I found that in the only contact available in a boys' school, another boy. And again, someone same age as me, but far more mature than me and far more developed than me. And so throughout my school years, I felt incredibly confused by gender because puberty wasn't happening. In the end, it did fire, but it didn't fire to my sixth form and carried on through university to the point where I didn't stop growing until I was 21, because by then it was, several years out of sync. So I felt totally, not only did I feel confused as to whether or how I was meant to be a boy, I didn't fit in my age group, my peer group in any way either. So I felt, out of sync with sex, gender, sexuality, and age, which meant me feeling, this child. When I was a child, I was very comfortable and confident and would talk to strangers quite happily, to the point of talking too much. As you can tell by my long answers to any of your simple questions. But I think it was that crushing realization that I didn't fit that started to make me go inward. And, and from my late teens all the way through to my late 30s, I became very, very introspective in my thoughts and started bottling things up. And I had nowhere to go with them because I couldn't find any language that existed or any people out there that existed that could show me there was anything outside of the binary norm.
Mm. So do you think that's kind of also what brought you to religion?
Well, I grew up in kind of what I would call traditional Anglicanism, which is, and the Church of England is a broad church, meaning that it kind of accepts everyone, and what you actually believe isn't that important. And in that sense, I was definitely looking for something to believe in, something to
Hmm.
belong to. So I actually went in search of stronger religion. And I joined a Bible class, an evangelical church, and at university discovered charismatic evangelical Christianity. And I deep dived into that. I deep dived into theology, started studying Hebrew, Greek, and eventually Arabic. Studied for a degree in theology and things. Studied archaeology, and eventually spent 15 years doing a lot of travel in the Middle East and a couple of years working as a missionary. I did. I did want to believe in something, but I think deep diving into Christian belief was also a way of avoiding deep diving into myself.
Mm.
And it became a wonderful divine distraction. And also, I was looking for acceptance, and obviously, the basic tenet of Christianity is meant to be, acceptance. Love your neighbor as yourself, and God loves you and died to save you, and all that kind of thing.
Mm.
Which doesn't ring so true when you find some Christians then rejecting LGBT people. And as someone who studied and taught Hebrew for a while, I love the non-binariness of the Bible, the fact that Adam was created hermaphrodite in many ancient versions of the biblical tales. The fact that God is described as using language that is male and female, described as having big breasts, or and
That's fascinating,
gathering
isn't it?
his children as a mother and a father. So yeah, and we're created in God's image. In God's image, he created them male and female. So the image of God is male and female. And I say I'm agnostic now, so I'm not preaching. But that was a journey I went through.
Mm.
And again, the binary version of the Bible, as it were, I found didn't fit. But it
Hmm.
was something I tried to lock myself in, because then I didn't have to deal with the Pandora inside. And the idea that I didn't feel like I fitted again in sex, gender, sexuality, age, or even religion. I didn't fit the religious box, but I tried it on, and I tried really, really hard to make it work,
Mm.
and becoming very believable in the point of that, able to persuade others to take on my belief that deep down inside I felt didn't really fit either.
Hmm.
So it was both a hard time and a hidden time.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, so what happened in the end? Like, because obviously you're out now. So when did that all happen? When did you come out?
Well, I think I nearly came out in my mid-20s. And as I said, my first relationship was with a guy at school for about 6 months. My next relationship was my final year of university, when I overheard my mum and my sister saying, "Do you think Jonathan's gay?" And so then, literally, the next weekend, I brought a girl home to prove I wasn't. We didn't do anything together, but we spent the whole night in my bedroom just talking. And she did have a nice bum as well. And she had a nice brain and a nice bum. Perfect combination. But we basically stayed up talking all night, and then merged from my bedroom into breakfast. And the very fact that a girl emerged from my bedroom obviously set the fears, or the possibilities straight for a while,
Yeah.
literally. And that was age 21. And then it was about age 22 through to 25. I dated this girl who became a doctor, became a psychiatrist, in fact. And we broke up on and off 2 or 3 times. But again, I couldn't believe that someone could love me. And I think this is why I again dated the guy at school, and then dated my wife. In some respect, I didn't not love them back, but I was in love with the idea of being loved,
Mm.
because I couldn't believe that anyone could, because I couldn't love me. So why would
Mm.
anyone else? And
Hmm.
also, if anyone really knew me,
Hmm.
they wouldn't want to date me, because inside of me was this person.
Yeah, like you felt you were hiding part of who you were.
Oh, yeah, I felt a fraud,
Mm.
in so many ways. And I didn't know what I felt that the version of me that I was projecting to the world was a fake. And the true me, under me, I didn't know what it was. So I couldn't even show the truth, because I didn't have a vocabulary for the truth. Like many kids experiment, I had experimented and played with borrowing, my sister's or my mother's clothes or buying clothes from a charity shop, and I cross-dressed in secret, and that was something because of my faith again. I kept thinking, oh, that must be wrong. That's dirty. That's sinful. That's whatever. And you're crossing some boundaries there. Well, I was crossing the boundaries because I was, borrowing other people's clothes, but I was, the crossing the boundaries of gender presentation, shouldn't be a thing, to be honest. And many kids, when they're young, play dress up. Just for me, I didn't start till later. And when I did start, every time I felt terrible and a sinner and tried to stop it, 2 or 3 years later, it would come back and I'd try again. So it was something I stopped continually. And I remember not really as a teen, but in my young 20s, even, buying a pornography magazine and looking at the pictures of the women in it and looking at them and thinking, particularly if there was a scene, for example, with a guy and a girl, or a scene with 2 girls in it, I would always prefer the 2 girls scene because I could identify as one of the girls in the picture. But if there was a guy and a girl scene, I'd always thinking, will the guy just get off the picture, please? Because, you're ruining it for me. So I knew I wasn't attracted to guys. And I also knew I didn't identify as the guy relating to the girl in it. Obviously, it wasn't real relations. It was porn. And I also, being a Christian, I hated myself for looking at the porn. But I felt conflicted looking at it, the fact that I identified as one of the characters in the photos, but it was always a female character I identified as in that sense. And, and again, growing up, this was, pre-internet and a lot of computer games where you can have a second personality and go off and explore the world, in a different gender in that sense. So just prior to getting married, I actually thought I better clear out my dirty closet, so to speak. So, as part of getting married, I went into some premarital counselling with my fiance, and I confessed to having done things like cross-dressed and been confused about gender and this, that, and the other. I was also completely thrown by the fact, even before I'd said half of this, the guy who was offering to pray for us, who was actually an obstetrician and gynecologist as a medical profession, but also a Christian missionary who believed in prophecy and divine knowledge and prayer and healing. So an eclectic mix. And he said, oh, I've got this, I'm hearing this word from God about you. And I'm thinking, oh God, here we go. Something deep and dark is going to come out about me. And he said, I have a picture of you with your gender twisted in the womb. I'm thinking, what? How does he know that? And I hadn't at that point said much. All I'd said was that I wanted to kind of clear out my closet before getting married and have a clean, no skeletons in it. Well, actually, when I was born, it took them an hour or so to work out which gender I was. And so his description of me having my genders crossed in the womb wasn't entirely inaccurate. And he didn't know that. My chromosomes were XY because I subsequently had them tested. But I was, designated female for the first hour of my life. Probably because I had a small winky, which was not obvious to anyone checking for the first hour of my life. Again, probably due to this slow puberty development that I had as a teenager, which turns out to be related to having very, very low testosterone and low hormones, and also receptors that don't really know what to do with my hormones. So yeah, I willingly therefore underwent Christian prayer to try and stop being trans, and also confessing to a relationship with a guy. So basically I had conversion therapy by choice for, at the time, being gay and trans, or gay and cross-dresser, or something like that. And
Wow.
the prayer and the counselling lasted pretty much the whole weekend. And by kind of day 2 of it, I just felt so battered by the prayer that I basically said, and when they were casting out my gay and trans demons, I was basically saying, yeah, they're gone now. Thinking, no, they haven't. But and I remember I used to wear kind of bangles. They were just like leather thongs around your wrist type thing. But I had a little metal necklace with a small Coke can on it, of all things, for fuck's sake. Nothing girly, but I had a necklace around my neck. But these particular Christians felt that guys shouldn't do jewelry. So again, it was one of the things they did as part of my therapy and prayer was they made me cut off all of my jewelry. And they literally took a pair of scissors and went up my wrist and cut all my bangles off and made me destroy my necklace. So
Well, that's just wasteful.
in some respects, I felt okay with it at the time because that's what I did to myself. Every time I would cross-dress or do something like that, I would destroy what I was exploring. And I would go through something that's very common amongst cross-dressers of a certain age, including me, I guess, at the time, was this kind of this purge and burn cycle. So you would buy things to express, you would collect a stash of clothes, makeup, expressions, jewelry, whatever, to express yourself, and then you would feel guilty, and then you would trash the lot and crash and burn them. So I went through that kind of cycle quite a lot from time to time. But then I just deep dived into having kind of pretended to some extent, but felt like it was a fait accompli. I didn't have much choice. I just accepted that this was going to be me, and I became the good Christian husband. And very much what people were then describing as the new man character type, because I was very happy doing the cooking at home, doing most of the shopping. My wife went out to work as a psychiatrist, and I had a part-time job teaching at a Bible college, also writing and teaching a Hebrew course, and the rest of the time being a house husband. And I was very content in that role. It wasn't anything that I felt awkward about. I didn't feel as I was being emasculated by it. I mean, at school, I'd spent 3 years in the Army Cadets because I thought I should man up, But I found gender roles, again, confusing. And therefore, I was quite happy to break out of them. But yeah, so from 25 through to 39, I hid in a Christian marriage and a Christian church, and became the dutiful son and the dutiful husband. And friends that I met, including an intersex friend who I didn't discover they were intersex until much later, but they said that in all that time that they'd known me, that I gradually got grayer and grayer as a person. The multicolored personality, the three-dimensionality of who I was became two-dimensional and grey, and I was clearly getting depressed.
Yeah, because you were denying who you were, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on.
No, I was going to say you can repress that for only so long before it bursts out, and that's essentially what happened. It's like trying to stuff it. I think I mentioned with the labels, I don't really like boxes, except to play in like a cat and jump in them from time to time and shake it about and then shred it. But in this analogy, I guess I'm like the Jack in the Box, or putting Pandora back in. You can't, and much as I'd kind of allowed the Christian worldview to repress me, and willingly at the time, as I say, I put the Jack back in the box, and around age 38, 37, 38, out popped Jill again, but in secret. And I experimented with cross-dressing again in my late 30s, and I would occasionally, take photographs of myself looking more feminine, and thinking, is that me too? And I thought I was both disgusted by it and I guess not attracted to the idea of it, but I felt actually comfortable and calm doing it until the guilt came back. And I still had that Christian guilt, conscience, judgment thing going on, so I felt bad. But when I was cross-dressed, I felt calm and comfortable, and I found I was most comfortable and creative, writing, creating, producing stuff when I could do that. And very often I was writing a couple of articles a week for other websites and things, and a column about Hebrew and theology of all things. And I found the best time to write was to write at 4:00 in the morning. And I would get up at 4 a.m., go out to my study in the garden, put on female clothing, and then sit down and write a theology article. One, because that's where I was hiding my stash of clothes, was outside on my garden office. And two, but once I then transformed, I felt comfortable and creative, and things flowed, and I felt more present with myself. And it's strange because when I was a child growing up, there's this children's TV series called Mr. Ben, and Mr. Ben was this cartoon character who'd go down his street, and he would go along to the local kind of dressing up shop or fancy dress hire outfit shop, and he would go in there and he would select an outfit, and then he would go into the changing rooms to try it. And since he went into the changing rooms and try it, he would become that character for that episode. And he was so comfortable in it. Or I feel like it was like Narnia, and I would go through the wardrobe after spending a considerably long time in the wardrobe, enjoying the wardrobe and putting on the clothes and the fur coats and all the rest. I would then go into Narnia, and I would enjoy being the character. And I think as a child, when I read fiction and fantasy novels, I could so empathically place myself within the character of the protagonist in a novel I was reading that I was there. So I found becoming someone else, even hidden inside my marriage, was actually a safe place for me. And then one day, I left my computer open. I didn't protect my computer with passwords for some reason. I just didn't think there was anything to protect, and I completely forgot that I had photographs of myself on there cross-dressed. And one day my wife was looking to look up some information on my computer, and she found them.
Mm.
And absolutely horrified, she kind of, understandably so, I guess, the shock anyway, she kind of had a quick scream at me and then drove off in her car and left. And we
Mm.
had a 2-week negotiation as to who I was, and I was given an ultimatum, I guess, essentially. I had to stop doing this or we would get divorced. And I was torn because at the time I was still Christian. Divorce was a sin, and being trans and having a sexual fetish or whatever was going on, that was also a sin.
Can't win then, can you?
Whatever I did, I was a sinner. I could not win. But I also realised that I'm 39 now, and I've been doing this since I was 9 or whatever, 30 years, and I haven't been able to stop it. The Christian deliverance and ministry team hadn't been able to stop it, and if God can't stop it, who am I to stop it? Because I'm not God, and if I was God, I'd stop it. And I couldn't. And so I just suddenly thought, for the first time in my life, I need to find out what this is and explore it a little bit more in the open and a little bit less in the dark. And so I said to my wife, I'm sorry, I don't think I can. I think I need to explore it, and maybe I'll get it out of my system. And that was what my thought was at the time. Look, I just need to play with this. Maybe I feel like I was a kid. When I was a kid, I wasn't given the freedom to cross-dress, play in the dressing up box or whatever. I probably was, I just can't remember it. And I thought, maybe if I'm as an adult, I get to play in the dressing up box for a bit, I'll be able to get it out of my system. And I thought that. And that was 14 years ago. Still struggling to get out of the system there. I'm not struggling at all to get out of the system now, but that's what I thought at the time. Maybe if I embrace it, I can get rid of it.
Yeah.
But that resulted in divorce. I guess I bear no ill feeling about that. In the end, it was a favour, because being called on it meant I had to face up to the thing that I couldn't face. And, having somebody else's anger directed at me was an alternative to me finding the courage to actually come out. So I was outed. And I guess it was a case of, at that point, thinking, well, it's sink or swim.
Yeah, what consequences did that have?
Well, it meant being outed to my family, to my church, to our friends. I lost probably 2/3 of my friends in that moment, but most of them were Christian evangelical charismatics who all thought I was a sinner, so that was kind of standard, I guess. The Christians who didn't reject me, I discovered half of them were secretly equally also LGBT or something like that. So actually that's the reason. And I would contact some old Christian friends from university and say, by the way, I don't know who I am yet, but I know I'm not a standard cishet person, and I may be trans. I don't know, and this is what I'm currently exploring. And the ones I spoke to suddenly said, "Oh, well, I came out as lesbian at 25, and I came out as this." And I suddenly realised that many of my so-called cishet straight Christian friends from university weren't also cishet, and many were actually queer themselves, but they'd all lost touch with me, or not connected with me, because they thought I was cishet evangelical judger of them, and we'd all kept our secrets. But yeah, it resulted in, obviously, divorce, being asked to leave my church. It resulted in, I guess, me taking my eye off the ball on my business and made my business struggle, which resulted in huge debts. So it was a very, very difficult period, and I'd been kind of diagnosed as depressed several years earlier by my GP, and not realised that, the nature of suppressing these things makes you ill. And not being myself made me ill. So my depression was strongly rooted in denial of who I was and repressing myself. And at the time I used to argue, my then wife she's a psychiatrist by then, and had been also training to become a psychotherapist, and she loved the concept of therapy and was in therapy herself. And I used to argue as to the point of therapy. I didn't believe in it. And yet suddenly I was thinking, shit, I might need it.
Yeah.
And being a Christian still at the time, I was debating with myself as to whether I should go for healing or therapy. I thought, well, I tried the healing thing, it didn't work, so I'll try therapy this time. I don't even remember how I found a therapist, but I certainly remember the first session of therapy I had. I was really analysing my therapist to decide whether or not they were going to work for me. And literally my first question was, I think I might be trans, and I'd like to find a way not to be. Can you help me? And my therapist said, no, I can't. I said, oh, okay then. She said, but I can help you on your journey to discover who you are. And she,
Mm.
you know, to this day, she remains a friend. And she was incredibly helpful at simply helping me unpack. In the end, I spent 18 months in therapy, mostly, you know, trying to sort out the effects of marriage, which was the effects of denial, eventually, really. It was the
Mm.
effects of not being yourself and having to unpack all of that. But in between, I was beginning to explore gender. And it was only about halfway through therapy I felt comfortable to actually kind of present to my therapist as Katy, not as John, and to start showing up to therapy sessions cross-dressed in quite effeminate ways. And anyone who knows me now knows that I don't dress in an effeminate way. I live in jeans and Doc Martens. And if I like, you know, flowery blouses, it's only because they match my flowery docs. It's so I don't necessarily choose clothes anymore because they're male or female or because they're, you know, flouncy or functional. I choose because I have a very, very strong attraction to aesthetics that work and things that match.
And what
And
makes clothes male or female anyway? It's a piece of fabric in the end, right?
it's how much room there is in the crotch.
Oh, and if there's pockets,
No,
and if there's
it's
pockets.
oh, and if there's pockets, yes, exactly. That's the worst thing about transition is losing pockets, generally speaking. And that's the first thing I look for when I buy clothes now. Do they have fucking pockets? Yeah, increasingly buying boiler suits now because, you know, like Rosie the Welder boiler suits, because boiler suits have, you know, jumpsuits, onesies, those kind of things, because they have lots of pockets. And because I have 3 phones, you need somewhere to stick them all. So yeah, I now see clothes as functional again, but I also see them as things of aesthetic beauty, and I'm attracted to aesthetic, beautiful clothes. But then even when I was presenting as male, everyone complimented me on my dress sense, because even as male, I always went for aesthetically pleasing clothing.
Mm.
So I've always found clothing as part of the expression of gender, but I don't even know whether I'm expressing gender through clothing or am I expressing a love of aesthetics. And for
Mm.
me, how I dress is an artful expression rather than a gender expression. You know,
Mm.
many people have heard
Yeah.
of the illustration of the genderbread man or the genderbread person, and the idea that, you know, there's an external gender expression, there's a sexual biology in the genital area, there's a romanticism in the heart, and then there's a gender in the brain. Well, I think that
Mm.
kind of 4-way matrix for who we are isn't enough to describe all the things that I feel and how I express myself. I definitely think that clothes for me are part of my artistic expression and not just my gender expression,
Mm.
you know, and it's the way I relate to the world.
Yeah.
And you know, and my house is kind of color coded. It's very full, my house, but it is color coded. Aesthetics mean a lot to me, and I find that having the right aesthetics calm me because I'm
Mhm.
bipolar as well. So my mood is far more calm if my aesthetics are right. And in the same way that from the age of 9 to 39, when I was cross dressing, I thought it was then. Actually, perhaps what I was doing was aesthetically dressing
Mm.
and finding calmness and comfort in my surroundings to be at one with myself. And it was less about, you know, I'm totally with these campaigns, let toys be toys and let clothes be clothes. You know,
Mhm.
why should, you know, one gender have all the best outfits? Um, so I don't really see clothes as gendered in that sense anymore. But definitely for a while, I tried them on thinking that's what they were about.
Mhm.
And I was, you know, both in therapy and also eventually going to see a psychiatrist. I thought that the cross-dressing would be a thing. I remember watching loads of Eddie Izzard stuff and loving Eddie Izzard's comfortableness with, and Eddie Izzard doesn't say he wears women's clothes, he says he wears Eddie's clothes, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, God, if only I could be that comfortable with being an executive transvestite, as he called himself, you know, an open cross-dresser rather than a secret cross-dresser, and able to be comfortable with mix and matching that as well, you know, wearing male clothes and lipstick or wearing female clothes and not wearing makeup and things like that, and
Mm.
not changing his voice and being obviously still Eddie. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, actually, that would be so much easier if only I had the confidence to be an Eddie Izzard. I wouldn't need to be a transsexual. And
Mm.
the thing I was most afraid of was not being gay or cross-dresser, was of being a transsexual, because I'm petrified of pain, didn't want an operation, and didn't want to make this permanent change from male to female. Or that's what I thought anyway. And so when I went to my psychiatrist, I spent ages arguing with him for months in all of our sessions, and he used to deal with probably 50 to 100 trans people a year. And inadvertently, he was also my ex-wife's first boss, which made it very strange having to come out to him and then seek his help for gender dysphoria when I already knew him. But he did say to me after a couple of years, he said, Katy, you are the most reluctant transsexual I have ever met, which has to be the name of my autobiography, really, The Reluctant Transsexual. There's one called The Reluctant Fundamentalist, and I was probably a reluctant fundamentalist as well. And I think I have tried on many things reluctantly and tried to identify as many things reluctantly. I think I reluctantly identified as sexual for quite some while. As part of my gender journey, I also thought, well, if it's about sexuality, that would be a relief, because then it isn't about gender, which is the exact opposite way around of the stereotype in the arguments by gender critical feminists that, that trans people, trans rights activists, they're all kind of a men's sexuality movement, and they're basically being trans to avoid being gay because they're secretly and inwardly homophobic, in fact. Well, I was actually at this stage by my early 40s thinking if I was gay, that would be a relief, because I was terrified by the idea of being trans. So I, again, did everything to avoid it. I thought, well, maybe I've got a sexual fetish. I'll explore that and see if that's true. So I tried that. I thought, well, maybe I just like having sex whilst cross-dressed. So I tried that. And it's surprising how many women were actually up for that, attracted to the queerdo in the corner. I like the queer weirdo. And I used to, and I remember saying in therapy to my therapist, if I go down the line of actually expressing this gender identity, whatever it is, cross-dresser through to transsexual, somewhere on that spectrum, I don't believe I'll ever have another relationship again, because I wouldn't date me. So why would anyone else? Well, that was the same attitude I had when I ended up dating a boy and then and then marrying a woman. In both of them, I thought, well, why would anyone date me? And so I still felt that. And yet, surprisingly, I didn't have, I think I've been in a relationship of some kind or another, and obviously because I do open relationships, sometimes more than one, continually since coming out. But I tried to take a year off after coming out, saying it's best I don't do any relationships for a year while I go on a journey of self-discovery. And then the psychologist wanted to come home and have sex with me all around my house and found me fascinating. And she broke that year, she broke my kind of not drinking, or rather not having sex year very quickly. And I'd only ever had sex with one woman, my wife. And so that was a bit different, a bit new. And from then on, it was uninterrupted relationships, and sex until about 4 or 5 years ago, on a journey of exploring via sex, but not realizing actually that I was exploring gender. I ended up going to a sex club in London with another trans friend, going on sex and body workshops in the UK and in California. And I made a decision internally that I wouldn't change my body unless I could accept it first, which again is slightly weird. It's like saying, hey, I can heal myself of gender dysphoria, and then once I've done that, I'm going to become trans.
Yeah.
But I made a decision I would accept my body before I would change it, because I didn't want to do it from a position of dysphoria or hatred or something like that. And I overthink everything, as I said, the reluctant transsexual. So doing these workshops, I entered and did these body relationships, sexual confidence, sexual discovery workshops in California, but I did them as Katy, but as Katy with a fully male body, no hormones, no sex change, no surgeries, nothing. And obviously, since most of the workshops were carried out naked, you couldn't even cross-dress to express your gender. So it's basically, me with a dick saying I'm called Katy. And actually finding 80 other Californians and other Americans and people from around the world in the room all accepting that and taking me on face value, and people not being particularly perturbed by it, which is a radical form of acceptance. It must just be hippie culture, I don't know. But it was lovely to be in a place where people weren't judging, which I hadn't encountered and certainly hadn't found in Christianity or in medicine. So that was liberating. And I eventually got to a place of saying, oh, okay, there's this body, and I'm also allowed to be Katy and still have this body. So maybe I've arrived. I didn't realise that maybe I was just actually at another station, and I'd got off for a while and was exploring the station and explored the little village and town beyond it, but actually eventually got back on the train to keep on my journey. During that time, I met this wonderful girl in America who herself was a therapist. beside the by, I kind of tended to only date therapists, but that was entirely an accident. It wasn't deliberate, I don't think. I found therapists fascinating because they were interested in the soul and the psychology and the mind, and so was mine. And I met this girl, and she was like kind of like an angel almost. I felt like during the workshops, and I was so afraid of how beautiful she was, and how interesting she appeared to be, both strong and delicate combined at the same time, both feminine and fierce, and vulnerable, and something else. I can't remember what I was thinking at the time, but I was probably deliriously in love with her. But
Beautiful combination.
yeah, but and yet at the same time, I didn't speak to her the whole workshop because I was so afraid that why would she speak to me? She's stunning, you know. And then at the end of the workshop, I was queuing up to book the following workshop, which meant coming back to California 6 weeks later or something. And she was in the queue behind me, and I don't know, I think it was an accident, but I just leant into her and touched her or something like that, and it just started a conversation, and we both admitted that we'd been avoiding each other all weekend and hadn't spoken to each other because we both thought the other one wouldn't be interested in speaking to us. And and then we started dating for a year. But during that year, I was increasingly moving towards this place of some version of interior happiness. She challenged me on a word that she brought a word into my vocabulary, really, I guess, during that year, and that word was authenticity and also trust. She said she couldn't trust that I knew who I was, and that was true. I still didn't know. So our relationship in that sense was doomed because it still wasn't based on honesty. And my marriage wasn't based on honesty. No relationship I'd ever had was based on total honesty because I didn't know who I was. And, unless you can't really do sexuality if you can't do gender. So I continued on the journey to discover who I was. And I was umming and ahhing and thinking whilst going out with her, do I want to take hormones? I wasn't really thinking about surgery, but I was certainly thinking, do I or don't I want to take hormones? And she wanted a family. And I thought, well, if I take hormones, that will destroy my my fertility, and so I won't be able to give her children. Or maybe I could give her children, and then I could have a sex change sort of thing. What I didn't know was that after we broke up, I thought, well, now that we've broken up, I've got nothing to lose. I might as well explore the possibility of hormones. By then, I'd started dating someone else who was very supportive of me getting hormones. I then got blood tests to take hormones, and they said, well, the estrogen will have no problem taking in your body. And I said, why is that? And they said, well, because you've got barely traceable testosterone. And now to the average bloke, blue-blooded bloke, if you're told you've got low testosterone, they'll be thinking, well, where do I get more? And I'm thinking, what a bloody relief. Everything makes sense now. I've got low testosterone. Yay. And it just suddenly explained the last 45 years of my life, or 43 years of my life at that stage. And I suddenly thought, well, fuck it, I'm going to take them. And I was told that, if you stop them within 3 to 6 months, there's not huge amounts of changes. For a male to female, there aren't that many changes in the first few months. Female to male, your voice breaks, quite quickly. So there are some less reversible changes there. But I was told that, if I decided they didn't fit in the first few months, I could stop and things would settle down again. And I could always take extra tea to make sure they did resettle. And for the first couple of months, I ended up eating a lot of cheesecake, watching rom-coms and crying. And I thought, that's what it's like to be a girl. Absolute tosh. That is what it's like to be a girl. But that was the emotional reaction of having a hormonal change. It's like multiple times a month all come at once from a huge intake of sudden estrogen. And also not having this testosterone to block it meant that it did, cascade into my body. I remember thinking, though, after a couple of months, but actually I've got the interior feeling that I was getting from when I was cross-dressing externally. I suddenly feel comfortable with myself. And why was estrogen making me feel comfortable and confident? I mean, if anything, testosterone is usually the one that's meant to be the confident-building hormone. But I felt more comfortable and confident with myself with increased estrogen. And I remember after 3 or 4 months, though, instead of actually, weeping at rom-coms, I still cry at lots of things really easily. I think I always had done it, nothing to do with the estrogen. But I remember after a while starting to think, I fancy watching Formula One. I thought, what? I don't like sport. Why do I want to watch Formula One? I started liking Dr. Martens rather than high heels. I started becoming very lazy in my gender expression. I thought, this is what it's like to be a girl. I like this. No, this is what it's like to be comfortable with yourself. So I was beginning to lose the labels of male, female, girl, boy, I guess. But I was being very comfortable with having the estrogen. And I thought, well, maybe that's enough. And again, like before, I was thinking, if only I could be a comfortable transvestite like Eddie Izzard. Now I'm thinking, if only I could be a comfortable hybrid, part male, part female. I'll gain the estrogen will give me breasts, whatever, neither here nor there. Don't mind them at all. Don't get me wrong, they're lovely. But I'm still thinking, well, I've come to accept the lower half of my body, my genitals. I don't hate them, don't like them, but I don't hate them. I like the feeling they give when I'm inside another person because it's interior touch. But actually, I realise I don't actually like sex that much, but I do like interior touch, which probably no one has ever heard sex described as. But I always had a sensual, tactile enjoyment of partially anyway, at least of sex. So at that point, I was just saying, okay, I'm going to accept the hormones, but I'm not going to have surgery. And then, hey, what? I met you. That's out of the bag now.
Ah, yeah.
And you met this hybrid person when we were both working on a festival together.
That's right. I mean,
Um,
obviously, when I did meet you, I was actually it's interesting. At the time, I thought, oh, I wonder if this person is a man or a woman. And I mean, now I would ask a completely different question. I wouldn't
mm,
actually ask that question, you see, because that's very binary again. That reaffirms
yeah.
the binary. So now I think I would just be curious about how you do identify and what your identity is and what labels you use like we're talking about now, because at the time you were using she her pronouns, right? And you
Mm,
were identifying more as female, I guess, weren't you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think ironically, at the time, I had a hybrid car, part electric, part fuel, part breast, part penis, and identified though with a binary pronoun. Now
Hmm.
I am actually post surgery and have to all intents and purposes to the outside world the female body, but identify now with the non-binary pronoun. So when I had
Yeah.
the non-binary body, I identified as a binary pronoun, and I've switched it. And also, I felt that when I took this reminds me of this car analogy, and I know nothing about cars, so just the fact that I'm using them isn't particularly masculine or understanding of engineering. But I do remember thinking when I started taking estrogen, I finally feel like I've got the right fuel in the car, because I remember back in the old days, pre-electric cars, when the issue was whether or not you put leaded or unleaded fuel in a car. And I
Mm.
suddenly thought, oh my God, I've now got unleaded flowing through my veins and it works. Or another way of putting it is I've now got, my French brain is now talking to my German body, and we now have an entente cordiale, and now we're all speaking Italian together. Um, and it fitted. But yeah,
Hmm.
certainly when I met you, I was this kind of mishmash. I was becoming increasingly comfortable with myself. And I'd
Hmm.
learnt from my partner in America to be on a journey towards authenticity. Since coming out or being outed, I'd made a decision. I need to be honest about everything. And
Hmm.
up until the point I met you, I'd been on a journey of increasing honesty, but I hadn't got to full honesty. But I thought I'd made it in terms of the honesty thing, even with you,
Hmm.
and I hadn't, because I was still being dishonest about the fact that I was well, no, we discussed quite openly and out loud throughout our relating. And I don't like the word relationship. I just like the word relating. It's a verb. We're doing a verb, and
Mm.
it means there's plenty of
That's
room
good.
for evolution in that. And it's not a noun. It's not a static state. It's not trapped. And I think as we openly talk to each other about it, who wants to be in a container when
Mm.
you can containers contain and they restrict,
Hmm.
and you starve them of oxygen and things like that. I know we do it to stop them going mouldy, but I think it's the adverse thing that happens. It actually makes them go mouldy. I'd rather take the lid off and see what happens and see how the gas expands. God, I come up with some rubbish analogies. But the point being that I think I'm trying to express is that whilst we talked openly about shouldn't I have an operation, and you were the first person I'd been out with who was. Various partners had said, very comfortable with you having the operation, Katy. Others saying, we really want you to have the operation. Because if you go out with a lesbian, they're kind of insisting on it a little bit, which is quite understandable. But if you go out with a bisexual person, they're going, oh, I don't really mind. Or if you go out with a straight person, they're thinking, I'd rather you didn't, because I quite like you to keep the penis, sort of thing. And I found that everyone I'd gone out with almost had an opinion
Mm.
on my genitals. And the only person who didn't really have an opinion was me. Or I had a say, but I wasn't really sure what my opinion was. And I was taking too much influence from who I was currently dating each time.
Hmm.
But you were the first person who openly pretty much said, well, I'm bi. I don't particularly mind. I know you're more pan now, but I'm bi, so I don't particularly mind. I kind of like penis, and I kind of like the other. It's fine, and actually, you're. I think it was the sweetest thing you ever said to me. Because you're really quite nasty. No, you're not. You're lovely. It's taken me 15 episodes of this podcast to have the courage to be interviewed by you. No, it's like you said, I think a pussy would look good on you. And I'm thinking, what? You're
I did say
joking.
that, yeah.
That's a really sweet thing to say. And it didn't make my mind up for me, because it was the fact that you said, I don't mind which way you go.
Uh,
And no one had ever said, I don't mind. And I suddenly thought,
mm,
oh my God, I've got to choose for myself, because everything else I'd done in every other relationship, I'd always done something for the person I was with. I always adjusted and accommodated, and
mm,
bent my choices to theirs,
mhm,
and became who they wanted me to be. And I guess I felt liberated with you to be me
mhm,
and to continually discover what that is. And that led to two things. It led to, one, making the decision to go ahead with surgery, and also the freedom within that surgery or around the same time, to realize that I wasn't that into sex,
mhm.
you know, and people can't see on a podcast, obviously, how beautiful you are. But if I was going to have sex with anyone, it would be with you. But I wasn't. I realised it just wasn't. It just didn't do it for me. And
Yeah.
also, I felt really afraid to say that to anyone. But again, I felt
Mhm,
safe with you to discuss whether I should or shouldn't have an operation. And I also felt safe with you to think, should I or shouldn't I have sex?
mhm,
You know, and those two decisions were a kind of pivot point halfway through the 8 years I've known you to actually make that decision to go ahead with surgery.
mhm,
And to think, well, if I do have sex again, it's going to be different coming out of surgery anyway, because I'm going to have different working parts. But it also made me take a rather radical decision for a trans person to ask my surgeon for a low maintenance version of surgery.
Designer.
Um,
Designer
a
vagina.
designer vagina. Well, actually, it doesn't. I don't have a vagina. That's the whole point.
Exactly, yeah,
I have labia. I have
yeah.
labia and a vagina that's as deep as my surgeon's thumb, as he said. I didn't realize how big thumbs he had till later. Um, but he gave me what's called a labioplasty, not a vaginoplasty, which
Mhm,
I basically said to him in our pre-op consult. That very one we offered to you offered your parts as a model for mine, and he said he had to work with the available material. And I thought, you bastard. Actually, I quite like you. You're so honest. So he dissed any possibility that I would have stunning lips, but in the end, what I said was, actually, can you just get rid of it all? And I think so. My gender surgery was me asking for him to get rid of it all, and he's saying, well, I can't just get rid of it all. I've got to put something there. And I said, so I said, well, he said, I can craft, a set of labia out of testicle material, which is to be honest, it's the weirdest correlation one can imagine, but the fact that they were originally the same material in the womb is a little hard to think,
mm,
because to me, testicles are one of the most ugly things on the planet, and labia are rather beautiful, and yet they're the same. They're the same tissue originally,
mm,
in the same way that a penis and a clitoris is the same, and
mhm,
the vagina is the whole extra bit that women have in that sense. So I didn't have a vagina added. I had the testicles turned into labia. And then he said, well, what do you want me to do with the penis? And I said, not much. Other than the fact that he turned down my request to keep my bollocks, which I wanted to preserve in a jar. I thought, well, I definitely don't want the penis.
for stand-up comedy purposes, yeah.
I wanted to be able to keep a jar and put a pair of testicles in it. And when someone used to, and have them in a little pocket jar in my pocket at all times, which is again the reason for needing to keep pockets. So if
Mhm,
someone stood up to me in the street and said, "Well, you're not much of a man, are you? You haven't got any balls," and I would always be able to say, "Well, yes, I actually do have. They're just not attached. Just bring them out of this jar." And it was a lovely lesbian friend who actually, once she realised I wasn't going to be allowed to keep a pair of testicles, she pickled a couple of walnuts for me and put them in a jar, and she wrote Katie's nuts on them, which for me works in both senses of the word.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, I went ahead with this labioplasty, and I pretty much said, not to the surgeon, knock yourself out. If you want to make a clitoris, and if it doesn't work, we can always turn it off, sort of thing, as in disengage the nerve endings. And didn't realize until 6 months later that I could actually turn it on, and that it actually worked. And actually, as someone who had what's called anorgasmia, which meant I always struggled to come as a male,
Mhm,
because again, the low testosterone meant that I was, one, infertile, and two, found sex very difficult to achieve in its
mm,
conventional. you have you have a climactic outcome. Sex obviously isn't that. That's just one interpretation of what sex is. And I found that, in fact, everything else involved in sex wonderful except for the climax bit, because the climax hardly ever happened anyway. And I also had very sensitive tissue that meant that actual penetration was painful. But what I when he gave me the clitoris, and I kind of just totally ignored the fact that he'd given me a clitoris until like several months later, and accidentally played with it and discovered it worked. And then I tried again a week later, and it worked again. And I tried again a week later, and it still worked. And I thought, oh, hold on, the penis never worked like this. How come the clitoris works? So after some replumbing, I actually had functioning sexual organs that functioned 20 times better than the previous one. But it didn't make me want to have sex. Still.
Yeah.
And I just realised, well, okay, so I've now got functioning sexual organs that have been switched out, and I'm still not interested in sex. Shit, what am I going to do? And to this day, no one has been anywhere near my parts except me. And I only go there when I have a headache, because they're a wonderful kind of hormone release when you're stressed. And, so again, it defies the argument that is sometimes made by gender critical feminists, so-called TERFs and other things, the fact that people who transition are in it for a sexual purpose and things. And they're, as an asexual, I'm the living proof that that's not true. As someone who was the reluctant transsexual, it's living proof that I haven't leapt into it as part of a fad. I spent 10 years trying to avoid being trans. Well, not 10, 45. But so, yeah, 4 years ago. And so each year, on February the 6th, I have a faniversary party, which you and 6 of my kind of best girlfriends each year come and celebrate and take the piss out of me, and it's great. And I have learned to self-deprecate my gender journey and realise that, God, I'm the worst case of someone trying to work out who I am on the planet. But I am enjoying the journey, and the more I think about it, the more I realise there are still steps. But I have arrived at a 95% happy with myself position. And as people sometimes say to me now, Katy, you don't have gender dysphoria, you have gender euphoria. Because at times I enjoy the play that is gender. I enjoy the reality that it's both a political and a performative act in society to be gender, but not to just be one of two, but to be one of many. Because I strongly think that everybody on the planet has a gender. I mean, this is a 50 Shades of Gender podcast, but I think there's 7 billion shades. Sorry, do we have to change the title now?
Oh, no.
But I think there's one for everybody on the planet. And if people ask me how many sexes there are, I'll go at least 2. Because the intersex variations that exist, the 22 chromosome combinations, the levels of hormone, the varieties of genitals that can exist, all of these things exist, on multiple spectra and are not either ors. So as far as I'm concerned, fuck the binary, except that I'm asexual, so I can't fuck anything anymore.
So is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, I guess this goes back to my faith to some extent. I think that the most important thing I believe in now is expression rather than repression, liberation. And I do believe in deliverance, but not necessarily the Christian form of deliverance and conversion therapy and things like that. I don't have any demons to expel. I've made friends with my demons, and they all live within me, and we're a big happy family now. So in that sense, I think we should be, it's a human right, and I identify mostly, as non-binary now, and as a human being with masculine and feminine, male and female expressions. And I hate the idea that both of them are still a binary version of expressions. Some of them can be attributed to hormones, some can be attributed to gender roles, some can be attributed to nature and nurture and things like that. I would rather say that, hey, I feel more like X and more like Y and more like Z, and plot myself in a 3-dimensional space, not a binary space. But within that space, everybody who is plotted on that X, Y, Z, and time as well, if you add an extra 4th-dimensional axis to it, because it's a journey, as I said, that wherever you plot yourself and wherever you move within that space, whichever quadrant you're in, let's do a bit of Trekkie stuff for you, you're still a human. I've yet to just realise that my journey might involve becoming another species. I think I identify as part Vulcan, part something else. I have no idea. No.
Feline, perhaps.
Oh, God, yeah. Is there a feline creature in Star Trek? I don't know. But I identify as human, but the depth and the expression of that humanity are a continual work in progress, a continual evolution. And it's a human right established, in the world, that we should have freedom of expression. Now, a lot of people interpret that as freedoms of belief or freedoms of speech, but I think it should also be about freedom of gender and freedom of sexuality and freedom of romance and freedom of relationship constraints or constructs. In other words, how two or more people choose to be in relationship with each other or choose to be relating to each other shouldn't be confined with the monogamous marital boxes that we have. So how I started out, I don't like boxes, and I don't mind labels so long as they're sticky and they come off easily, unlike the ones from some charity shops where you spend 2 hours peeling them off.
Like removable adhesive. Yeah,
Yeah,
removable
exactly.
adhesive.
So I think I will acquire more labels in the future, and I will unpeel existing ones, But humanity is my journey, even though it started as a gender and sexuality one.
See, that's beautiful, because I think we're always becoming more of who we are, whether that includes gender or, well, it includes everything, everything that makes us human.
Well, it
Totally.
just makes you more beautiful. And, I've used this as a kind of a quip in the past that I spell beautiful, BU to the full.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm trying to be more of.
Yeah, absolutely. Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Katie. We finally got round to doing this. It's so funny, isn't it?
The reluctant interviewee.
Yes. You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Katie, where you can also read the transcript, and you can find out more about Katie on their website, katyjon.com, and on social media. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com and on social media. If you'd like to support us, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Plans start from only $1 a month. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender for more details. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded.